Again.
Yes. Okay. I think we are live. Welcome, everybody, to our monthly book club discussion. This month for April 2020, we are going to be discussing the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And with me is Agatha. So, welcome, Agatha.
Everyone.
And well, I guess let's just kind of hop into it. What did you think of this book?
Oh my gosh, I don't like when you ask me this question right away.
Okay. Well, do you want to give a little bit of a background about the book?
Yeah, let me
Okay.
give a little background because I think it will be great to just, tell people what this
Sure.
book is about, which is really cool. So, Viktor Frankl, right?
Mm-hmm.
He is he's a psychiatrist and a psychologist. What was he? He was psychologist, right?
Psychiatrist.
Psychiatrist. Okay. So he was a psychiatrist and also survivor of 4 different Nazi camps. So he went to Auschwitz and Dachau. And he actually had a manuscript of the therapy before he was sent to Dachau, not to Auschwitz first. And he lost it. So he rewrote the whole book from the beginning and he changed it a little bit. Um, and I think this book gives us a wonderful perspective because he doesn't write the book only as a psychiatrist or, like a scientist, but also as a survivor. So he was like his own case study almost, like,
Mm-hmm.
test subject in a way. And this book was classified as both psychology and memoir. And he writes it in the first person. So it's like autobiography, which is really great. Um, he covers not only his personal memories in Auschwitz, Dachau, and other camps, but also how it impacted people and what was the difference between those that survived the war and those who didn't. Um, and he clearly spent majority of his life engaged in a search for meaning, deeper understanding of suffering, hope, freedom, responsibility, and optimism, and how something that how this is something that every human needs to find on their own. Uh, this book, this is a couple of facts I have here. This book was first published in 1946 in Vienna, in Austria, 1959 here in the United States, and by the time he died in 1997, this book has been identified as one of the most influential books in America and has been sold over 10 million copies and translated into 24 languages. So just that fact, tells you a lot how good this book is.
Yes, I would
I
agree.
have to mute myself and text my daughter to not to
Okay.
text me right now. So
Okay.
sorry about that.
Okay. Yeah, this book is one of those books. I think for a lot of people, it was considered required reading in high school, and probably some sort of philosophy class in college. It's fantastic. Unlike a lot of books regarding kind of covering the experience of a Holocaust camp survivor, this one really differs in the fact that it was more about his exploration of understanding meaning. So uh, he, during his time there, he was in 4 different camps over a span of 3 years.
Mhm.
His father, mother, pregnant wife, and brother were all killed in the concentration camps. His sister was able to escape and went to Australia, and he was liberated. When the war ended. So he is a psychiatrist, and his primary field of research was
Suicide.
neurology. Yeah, and it was
Yeah.
the focus was on suicide and depression. And so he ran a treatment center before he was in the camp. And like Agatha was saying, he was starting to write down this whole philosophy on the importance of meaning. And he was using this philosophy, his philosophy in this treatment center that he was the director of, and working with
Mhm.
people that were severely depressed and suicidal. and the rates of suicide attempts basically became non-existent. And the one thing that he was doing was he was really focusing on helping these people to find meaning in the pain that they were experiencing, and to kind of reinstill hope, and to be like, okay, this is a lot of pain that you're dealing with, absolutely, but it doesn't have to end here. Like, we can't, I guess in a nutshell, his whole theory is, although there's circumstances that are sometimes outside of our control, the death of a loved one, a car accident, an accident in general, a disease, the Holocaust, something like that, that is really difficult. And although we can't change certain circumstances, we can change the meaning that we're assigning to them. And we can assign the most empowered meaning possible. And I would say for him, uh, even though he attributes his ability to stay alive in the camp as just sheer luck,
Mm-hmm.
I would also say that a lot of it had to do with he found significant meaning and purpose in helping, in working with a lot of the prisoners there that were suffering with major, depression and suicidal feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And that, that was already his kind of life's work. And so it helped him. It does help, right? I think we've all been there, where it can really help for us to get out of our own pain by focusing on the pain of somebody else.
Yeah, I think just before he was freed from the camp, he had a couple opportunities to escape, but he went back to take care of his patient, typhus, I think. There was like a typhus epidemic at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was, yeah, he literally find fulfillment in helping others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it spoke volumes, in part one, originally with the concentration camps, of course, when this first, well, not even when it first started, but for a long time, nobody knew what was going on in the camps outside of the the prisoners,
Mm-hmm.
and or the hostages. I don't even Prisoners doesn't even sound like an accurate description, or the Nazis. And
Mm-hmm.
so they were telling them to kind of keep them calm. Okay, if you're coming to this camp, it's a work camp, and you can bring some items with you. And so of
Mm-hmm.
course people were bringing things that were most significant to them, which was a lot of times jewelry, valuables. And for him, he brought his
Manuscript.
manuscript of
Yeah.
the book. And so when they get to the camp, the
Mm-hmm.
guard is going by and they're taking off, they're collecting all of the valuables that people have brought with them. And they took his book, and he
No,
was
he hid it first. He
he
hid
hid
it
it.
first.
Yes, he hid
Yes,
it. And
he
then
didn't
they
give it first.
they got it. And he was so upset, and he kept saying, please, there's no value. This is my life's work.
Yeah.
Value to you or anybody else.
Mhm.
And they didn't care. It was kind of this sadistic, enjoyable.
They were disgusting. They actually called it shit in
Yeah.
in German. Like that's what they were
Yeah.
saying about it and about anything else that they held valuable. But I have a quote here because I think he actually said this was the most important moment in his life, even.
Hmm.
Um, so this is the moment when he arrived to the Auschwitz. So it's here. Not yet did I notice that an answer to this question, with which I was wrestling so passionately, was already in store for me, and that soon thereafter this answer would be given to me. So that was about the meaning of his life. This was the case when I had to surrender my clothes and in turn inherited the worn out rags of an inmate who had been already sent to the gas chamber immediately after his arrival at the Auschwitz railway station. Instead of the many pages of my manuscript, I found a packet of the newly acquired code, one single page torn out of the Hebrew prayer book, containing the most important Jewish prayer, Shema Israel. How should I have interpreted such a coincidence, other than as a challenge to leave my thoughts instead of merely putting them on paper? This, this is when he made a very conscious decision to not only remember what he wrote and to somehow find a way to recreate it, but to really live it, leave the world, and that this is why I think this book, gives us such a unique perspective on what it is to really find a meaning in the midst of helplessness, in the midst of people dying around you. Because I think so often, and actually he talks about a little bit later, that so many like Freudian psychologists, they or like other psychologists, they will sit with you in the office and they will try to talk to you about things that they've never ever experienced, so they don't have that connection with their patients. And he had some sort of connection previously, working with patients, but now he was living through it, so he can now, this is not just a concept for him. Finding meaning and surviving, it's no longer a concept.
Yes. And I think it's significant along those lines to talk about how this philosophy really differed from other forms
Yeah.
of kind of
Mm-hmm.
therapy at the time. So, of therapy, psychology, and philosophy. So, you had Freud,
Mm-hmm.
who was, probably about 40 years or so, 30, 40 years before Viktor Frankl.
Mm-hmm.
And his focus was on psychotherapy, which was talk therapy, but the focus was on exploring the subconscious. So for Freud, and in Freud's basis of his therapy was that we were based kind of the pleasure principle. We were all driven by pleasure. And so it was exploring these repressed and suppressed um, desires. And
Mm-hmm.
then you had
Conflicted desires.
conflicted
Yeah.
desires, or desires that were, or then you had, I don't remember when
Young was after Freud. It was probably similar time that Frankl, a little bit before.
because Jung was about exploring the mind, but more through dreams
Dreams.
and images. But then you had Nietzsche, who was a philosopher, but it was more, his whole premise was more of man. Man is more driven by the power, and same with Adler. So Adler was another.
Actually, that's not really correct. That's a very simple understanding of his philosophy.
Who, Nietzsche?
Yeah, he actually based some of his work here in Nietzsche. I don't remember which part of his philosophy, but it was something about meaning as well in Nietzsche.
Oh yeah. No,
Yeah, it's
but
different.
that
It's not
his
just power.
one. No, not just, but
Yeah.
his Nietzsche was the one that was, his premise was called will to power. And
Okay. Yes.
then Adler's premise was on um kind of man's quest to overcome feelings of inferiority.
Mm-hmm.
So there were all of these different thoughts,
Yeah.
schools of thought at the time of kind of
Mm-hmm.
what drove a human
Mm-hmm.
being. And so Frankl was like, actually, that's all interesting and it's all significant in its own way. However, what really matters is meaning.
Yeah.
And he uses the quote from Nietzsche where he talks about, it's, if anybody has a large enough why, then they can find the how.
Mm-hmm.
And he opens the book with that. So I think that does speak volumes about how much weight. I mean, that was the crux of
Yeah. So he takes like from Freudian was the will to desire, and he puts more weight on a will to meaning, basically.
yes.
Yeah.
And so Frankl developed um
Meaning-based psychotherapy. That's what
yes.
it is basically.
And so he calls it logotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's three core principles on which this theory is based. So the first one is that every person has a healthy core.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one is that one's primary focus, like our job as human beings, is to enlighten others to their own internal resources and provide them tools to use for their development of their inner core. And the third is life offers purpose and meaning, but does not promise fulfillment or happiness. So it's like we were talking about before we went live, Agatha, about where this meaning comes from. And um, it's, you had made a comment like it's not coming from within. It's not making sense of our
Yeah.
childhood. It's not making sense of our feelings. It's we develop meaning by interacting with the world around us and creating this most empowering meaning possible, which I think that's powerful. And he also talks about there's 3 different ways that meaning is made.
Mm-hmm.
It's
By doing good deeds.
creative,
Mm-hmm.
attitude, or experiential. So
Mm-hmm.
through experiential, it's finding meaning and experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
Finding meaning and experiencing something so we don't without doing anything. So for example, watching a sunset.
It's a by beauty, for example. Yeah.
Yeah, you're just
Or love.
experiencing kind of right,
Yeah.
experiencing what is, or experiencing another's uniqueness.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
You know, it's
attitude.
really interesting how much
Mhm.
of Frankl was stolen, I think, stolen and sold to many people as a landmark forum. It's just interesting. They also go over those 3 concepts: experiencing of community, beauty,
Oh, that's interesting.
the things,
I know that the Landmark Forum
the
is,
meaning. Yep.
I mean, none of their material is original. It's all kind of
It's
just
it's such a
recycled.
it's such a, they're just stealing other people intellectual property and saying it's their own methodology. It's
Yeah.
like ridiculous.
Yeah, it's
So
recycling of ideas.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Uh, but so,
Yeah.
okay, so then you have meaning formed by attitude, which is when we actually assign meaning to something, and meaning formed by creativity, which is meaning formed by doing or creating something meaningful. So artwork or making a baby, or there's this sense of gardening. We're actually creating
Mhm.
something, but his main focus in the concentration camps was on meaning created through attitude,
Mhm.
where and he's so right, because the difference, you can see a person's um attitude, like their mind. So for example, people, let's say, that were drafted into the war, that didn't want to be there, that whichever war, right? And then you had people, well, you have like suicide bombers or kamikaze pilots, or people that are willingly, in their mindset, their attitude is, I'm going to martyr myself. I'm willing to die for this cause. And so I'm not obviously advocating
I
for that
hope
kind
not.
of, no, yeah, that kind of extreme behavior, but it's in the attitude that makes all the difference in a person's actions. It's what drives their behavior.
Yeah, but here's the thing. He makes a big, like, he draws a very very strong line between a suffering you cannot escape and a suffering you're causing and a suffering you can escape. And I think, that third, the altitude, is you are finding and you're fulfilling on your meaning, on your purpose, in a phase of the suffering you cannot escape.
Yes.
So you can have a great altitude towards things you cannot escape. And, obviously, like, we're not gonna compare, him surviving basically genocide to, what we survived, just domestic, I mean, I'm not gonna say just domestic violence, but in comparison to the genocide, it's kind of like lands like very tiny small, but everyone survives whatever they have to survive. So there's a situation we couldn't escape, and we had to, and also things that already happened, you cannot escape them anymore, they happened. So right now you can only create a meaning in the face of what had already happened. Now if you are in a relationship and you can escape, because I think that's what we were talking a few days ago, you can escape that suffering, you can escape the abuse, because I mean, maybe you don't see it yet, but there are ways for you to find a way out of it. Do not create a meaning that this is going to make you a better person. I think that's what you were trying to say about those kamikaze pilots, that some people pick something that is just utterly inhuman and they think they will find their meaning in fulfilling on that crazy mission. That's not what Frankl here talks about.
Right.
There's a big difference in creating meaning, out of something that I guess universally is meaningful, because to us people, certain things are just universal, protecting life and stuff like that, than that other crazy one, I guess.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Yes. And I think that would go back to his second point, um, in his logotherapy, which is our purpose is Um, ideally, we relieve much of the suffering that we have
Mm-hmm.
through finding the highest and greatest good, finding the meaning that's the highest and greatest good for ourselves, and then in time helping other people find it within themselves. And it, that's kind of in what he really believes is more of the purpose of life, is this, which of course ending your life would not go hand in hand with that. So my
Yeah.
example of the kamikaze pilots or whatever, yeah, maybe that wasn't the best.
Well, he talks about, remember, he talks about this woman. She lost one child and then she was left with the child on a wheelchair.
Mhm.
And he has, I think he talks about the group therapy. And in that group therapy, he asked this, I think there was some other woman there too, but he basically asked them to think about what could happen in the future. Do you want to talk? Because someone's talking in here. And can you hear that?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me mute myself and I will just wait.
Okay. So, um, let's see. Here's a quote from the book that I thought was significant. He says, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances." And he had talks about these different moments where, uh, he's at this camp. They're freezing, they're starving, they're, it's just terror every single day that they're living. And he was thinking of his wife, not knowing if she was still alive or dead. But then he kind of had this moment of realization that it really didn't matter. It was, well, of course it mattered, but it was more of he was just enjoying the thought of her. And um, in deciding to kind of make positive meaning where he could find it, in the camp. And let's see.
Sorry, I'm back.
Okay.
I have to ask people to be quiet again because they forgot. It's pandemic. Um, I was trying to. Did you finish that story about the woman that lost their child?
No, I moved on to a different.
Okay, let me just finish it because for me
Okay.
that was amazing when she realized that she needs to stay alive because she has this child. And like he asked her question, what will you say to yourself when you are 80 years old? So basically he just put that person in the future, and then that 80 years of life had a completely different meaning. And I think he had, this woman just see that she spent this time making sure that her child on a wheelchair had the best life it could have. So she basically fulfilled on like herself because she had a child that was happy, for all this time. And she dies knowing that she did something really great. And none of it, would happen, obviously, if she, she committed suicide, which, he also says that he did so much research. And I think this is something that psychologists say now to people who try to commit suicide, that everyone who attempted but did not succeed is very, very happy they didn't do it, because often it is just a couple weeks later they see a solution to their problem. And just like people don't think about it in a moment they want to commit suicide, but it's literally just sometimes a couple weeks and you see solution to your problem. And that's just amazing. So I want to ask you something, because I thought that's like the thought he has, and it's like a deep thought behind his whole logotherapy, when
Mm-hmm.
he says that we need to live our life like it's a second time, and like we already did like everything like the worst way we could really do, and we're about to do it again, and be responsible for that. What did you think when he said that? Like we have to live like it's a second time already.
Hmm. I I don't know. I guess I was just kind of focused on, um the just living our life. I guess I viewed it as we live our life originally kind of by default.
Uh-huh.
We're on top of the waves, and we're the highs and lows of life are like that. We're bouncing around at the top of the ocean of life, kind of a thing. And then that second life is a life of purpose, on purpose,
Uh-huh.
where there's that level of kind of, we're not so in the thick of it, there's kind of this inner stillness within us where we're not at the mercy of events around us emotionally. We're able to be, um, we're able to just assign that meaning to different events.
I couldn't wrap my head around this one first because I was like, what do you mean like a second time? What do you mean like I did already everything the worst way I could possibly do it and I'm about to do it again? And I was like, how is he connecting it to that idea of, responsibleness? That's what he says that. And it was just like, because, usually, especially for survivors of abuse, for us, often someone telling us we have to be responsible, it lands like we need to be we are guilty or at fault of something, but he actually talks about the responsibleness as something completely different, something that you choose to do, right? So I was like, I couldn't really figure it out first, and then he says that the in a therapy that the therapist, his whole goal is not to uh, tell the patient to be responsible for anything. Like you're not responsible for ruining your life before and now you're going to do it again. But it's like they help a patient to just discover who they want to be responsible for, to whom, for what, how, and all of that. And that creates a completely different perspective. It's like you can stand on the solid ground of like, you know what, everything happened, but I get to decide now what I'm gonna do about it, like this attitude. And I don't know, I just love that.
Yeah, I do too. I think that's a really profound shift. I know for me personally, that's when my whole healing journey radically changed,
Mm-hmm.
when it was that realization. And it happened completely by accident.
Uh-huh.
You know, where it was my mom had made this comment that was actually really insensitive, but she didn't mean for it to be. She just wasn't thinking. And
Mm-hmm.
um she had made the comment that maybe it was my relationship with Jack was a good thing because he'd helped me uh kind of repair some of these rental properties. I remember thinking like, are you kidding? So much damage was done. I would have much rather paid a handyman and not been like emotionally messed up for years on end. But I was so angry with her when she said that. But I started thinking about it. I'm like, well, what if I were to change the meaning that I assign to this? Like, what if this was something that was actually working for my highest and greatest good? And asking myself that question, like, what could I kind of squeeze out of this?
Mm-hmm.
Everything changed. And then coming across my grandmother's book with her experience with my grandfather, who was a narcissist, and just how horrible he was to her, and just what a struggle she had with everything. And I never I didn't know like 98% of that growing up. I just kind of knew the basics. And my mom giving me her book and reading that and realizing, oh my gosh, this woman, had anybody known her, you wouldn't have thought that she ever experienced the day of pain in her life. Like, she was such a beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
loving, kind person. And she had made that conscious decision to not let what happened to her destroy her.
Define her. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like I think he says something really profound here, that life asks us a question, but we start asking a question of life. And then he says that there's this moment when person realized that, well, there's someone inside of me asking the question.
Mm-hmm.
And that in that moment you literally start experiencing yourself as more than what had happened to you, more than all the survival mechanisms. That's why he takes this, like, it's like a level up or step up from the Freudian approach, whatever, because like no one will stake their life or just fulfilling their desires, like, no. But if you discover yourself as someone who has a way to not only create a deeper meaning of your life, but also fulfill it, and then also not only for yourself, but like help others to find the meaning in their life and show them that they are able to fulfill that meaning, that they are capable, that's a life worth of living. So he takes a human out of being just a result of something that happened to you to being at the source of what can happen in the future. I just love that this whole logotherapy is future oriented. Like, just the best thing. It's like
Yes.
meaning oriented and future oriented. This is why when you asked me, what do you think about this book? I was just like, gee, it's hard to not to be biased, because this book literally, like, I was reading it and everything was like a like what I like, you know?
Mhm.
So freedom, responsibility, and meaning, anything that brings me more meaning in life, like just discovering it. And then creating meaning with the reality as a background, because you cannot create a meaning to something that is happening, like a false positive meaning,
Mhm.
because that's gonna just create neurosis, I guess. I don't know, like that's
Well,
just not good
yeah.
for you.
Yeah, let's dive into that because you touched on that a little bit before about
Mhm.
how he had mentioned, there's suffering that's avoidable and then there's suffering
Yep.
that's unavoidable. And it's our job as part of as part of
Mhm.
being he calls it responsible, like a responsible person
Yeah.
is to not put ourselves in harm's way and to get out of the way of harm as much as possible. So
Hmm.
then we're only left trying to cope with the suffering that we can't avoid, death, disease, accidents, these kinds of things. And you had mentioned about, and I absolutely agree. I thought this was a fantastic point that there are so many survivors out there or people that are in abusive relationships
Hmm.
that have been um, either intentionally or unintentionally kind of manipulated
Hmm.
by their belief system or by those around them to believe, oh well, I'm some this is somehow my karma, or this
Oh
is
gosh.
somehow God wanted me to be here to suffer in this relationship because
Hmm.
somehow it's my duty to heal this, to try to heal this other person, right? But really all they're
Remember
doing
how
is
we
just
we wrote
falling on
about
their sword.
spiritual abuse? I like that's what I was reading
Mhm.
it. I was thinking, wow, that's someone who can really manipulate the other person by using their beliefs. Because
Mhm.
in especially like in Christianity, there is so much weight put on a sacrifice and pain and suffering, and if that is taken out of the context and just used to manipulate someone, and then this person is told that you need to find the meaning of your life, and that's just very wrong. And I know this is happening. We wrote a little bit about it. So.
Yes. Yes. And I really like that he makes that distinction about
Hmm.
um because the whole with between suffering we can avoid and suffering we can't avoid. Um and I think it's important to realize that that this whole kind of existentialism, this
Hmm.
philosophy isn't the same as nihilism. And whereas
No,
nihilism is more of kind of, well, nothing matters. And um you know
he saw people going through all the different stages in a
mhm,
camp. So I want to go back a little bit quickly, because I forgot I wanted to say that the book is in three parts, and the first part is when it's a memoir. So if someone thinks that they will be personally triggered because of all the different experiences to read that part, it's okay to skip that. Like, there will be no consequences of not reading part two and just going to the part one and going to the part two. Like,
mhm.
that's okay to do. Like, I was personally a little bit triggered because I had someone in a camp in Dachau, so for me to read it was really hard. And I think there's more people probably will be even harder. So um, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah.
Because we want people to know what can be very triggering. So part two and the part three of the book are like almost separate parts, and you can absolutely just skip part one if you feel that this is if you want to avoid it. You are responsible for avoiding that suffering. You can avoid that
Yeah.
for
Yeah,
yourself.
if you feel like you're going to be, it's too disturbing to read about
Yeah,
concentration camp. And it's very much, I would say, just a surface level that he goes into it. But
yeah.
even a surface level description of a concentration camp is horrific. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, his focus, and I think this is significant. And Devora had mentioned earlier on in the chat too, about uh, a potential alternate title of the book. hers, she said that she had heard somewhere, read somewhere that the original title, or one of the original titles, was like exis from
Yeah,
death camp to
existentialist.
existentialism. And some of the other titles this book has been under, and I don't know, that's news to me, but some of the other titles it's been published under is a psychologist experiences the concentration camp, and then later on, say yes to life in spite of everything. And the final title that they ended up landing on was Man's Search for Meaning. And
Mm-hmm.
I think this is very significant because the focus is exactly on that. It's man's search for meaning, and how powerful that is in the face of ultimate suffering, and suffering within a community of people. Like, there is no escaping it. It's around, it's coming at you at every single angle. And how powerful that is, that he writes about just this, what is it all about, and how can we use this? Like, if this is all there is, then there is no point. Like, we've got to be able to take what happened and do something positive with it.
Mm-hmm. So I was saying a little bit about how he was observing different psychology of people, and he saw that um, certain people have given up, and that last day they were usually like smoking, just really resigned, and they just, there was no fight in them left, nothing. And like he, I guess like he didn't say anything about interacting with them, because I think at that moment everyone knew that they already made a choice, and they just were
Yeah.
left to, they were almost like honored, like it was their choice to say no more suffering. And I was reading it, and for me it was, I had very mixed feeling here, because at once I felt that so is it like okay to leave a person who, in an unescapable, like, in that's genocide setting, that's not like abuse, that's genocide settings, that's completely different. But was it okay to leave that person, to let them decide that they just done, it's okay, like it was okay for them just to give up? Like, shouldn't someone try it? But then I thought that he's I don't know. I think he he thought that it's really everyone's own responsibility to choose that life, so that choice has to be honored. And I thought that, of course, I've never been in a situation like this, and I hope to never be. Uh, but I think in such a extreme, circumstances, people find a completely different way of looking at humanity and honoring that humanity, and just letting someone decide that they're gonna give up right now and they're gonna smoke that cigarette because there is nothing else they want to do anymore. They just don't want to live. That,
Mm-hmm.
honoring that, I guess they, in the midst of all that suffering, that was for them like finding that dignity of being a human being.
Yes.
And that was like really amazing for me to read it, like we're starting from like very mixed feelings and not really understanding it, because you can't understand it when we weren't there.
Mm-hmm.
And then coming to that place when I was like, oh my gosh, that's like dignity of being a human being in the midst of nothing. They found that dignity of being a human being.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah. I think if a person's feeling suicidal for, or wanting to end their life, not even suicidal, like, if I think
mm-hmm,
it's the ultimate, it's part of individual freedom, and it's a part of choice. And I think, me personally, it's if a person's terminally ill, or if circumstances are just, I get it, where people, you know um are just, they want to be able to control that one thing. I would hope, if it's situational, or if it's something that, can turn around, if they can kind of get help or reach out for resources, um, you know, that that we would be able to help a person get the help they
mm-hmm.
need, if that would help to solve their problem. But yeah, um, I thought that was a beautiful thing, where there was kind of just this honoring of we understand, like, this is
Mm-hmm.
extreme times. And Devora makes a really interesting comment in the chat that I absolutely love. She says, all we are here to do is make meaning out of what happens to us. We are now entering a new phase where people will have to make meaning out of catastrophe, not their successes.
He
Yes.
actually talks about it in a book about how, and this is crazy. This is what drives me crazy, because he wrote this book so long ago, published so long ago, and so many people read that. And when this book was published originally, he said he witnessed that society was becoming more about being successful and productive than living a meaningful life. And I think we went either more extremely towards that successful and productive life instead of meaningful life. And he actually saw it as a big risk factor, and I think he covers what he calls unemployment neurosis, something like that, I think it was in the third or second part of the book,
Mm.
when he says that if people cannot work on like be productive and fulfill on something in their life for extended period of times, they become violent because the aggression is rising, the addictions are rising, and depression, suicide. So what Deborah says, that's very true. Like right now, it's not that we will need to find the meaning in what has happened now and how we gonna recover from it, but also we will have people who will deal with depression. They maybe now experience violence and addictions, and like there's always something. Here's the thing what we have to all remember. There will be always something in life that will challenge us to find a deeper meaning and to deal with. Always something, whether it will be one person treating you badly or something that is globally impacting everyone right now, or just one nation. Like he was writing about something that was impacting one nation, but it happens so many times over now in the world that someone is trying to get rid of someone. That's just insane.
Yes, I remember there was a gal, and I don't remember if it was the group or the chat. This was, I think, a couple of years ago, and she was talking about her and a friend of hers were on this road trip, and they passed this billboard on the highway, and it had her ex's. It was just a commercial, but it had the person on the billboard or whatever had the same name as her ex, and her ex had a very unique name. And so the meaning that she had originally assigned to that was, oh my gosh, I can't escape this. Like there's constant
It's
reminders of
everywhere.
him. Yeah, he's everywhere. The constant reminders, and she was
Yeah.
feeling really discouraged about that. And we had talked about, okay, well, that's one way, that's one meaning that we can assign to it. Or we could assign the meaning of, how profound is it that your ex's name is stationary on this billboard, and here you are flying by in a
Mm-hmm.
car, living your best life with a good friend. And so it doesn't have to be this negative meaning of having this reminder of him. It can be this meaning of, that's in your past. He's in your rear view
Mm-hmm.
mirror. You know,
Mm-hmm.
he's not going anywhere. He's always going to be in that same spot. And you're out there moving full speed ahead. So there is so much power in different meaning that we assign to it. And like you had said, he had talked about these behaviors that come up in people when there is this lack of meaning. There was addiction, depression, and aggression.
Mm-hmm.
And he also talks about feelings of apathy, boredom, lack of interest, and lack of initiative happen when we don't have meaning. And
Mm-hmm.
so also, I also wanted to say what was significant about this, like you were saying earlier about how Freud and a couple of the other uh, kind of schools of thought
Schools.
at the
Mm-hmm.
time, yeah, it was more of, okay, this pleasure principle.
Oh,
Like if we're,
resolving the tension.
yeah, so if we're
Yeah.
looking at like Maslow's pyramid, right?
Yeah.
Freud's the whole thing, the pleasure principle, kind of just these basic needs. We're at the bottom of Maslow's
Mm-hmm.
pyramid, right? And then you had Nietzsche, and you had um, uh, uh, Oh,
Young.
will to power. I'm drawing a blank. Shoot. Um, Sorry.
Anyway, they were all kind of like building up to what's the highest. It's like that meaning. That's what you're trying
Yes.
to say?
Yes, but Frankl, what's significant there is Frankl takes that pyramid and he flips it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh,
so he
that's
says,
from meaning everything else can.
yes.
Yeah, I love that.
I think that's really
But I love it from a different side. I wasn't looking
profound.
at the mass of it all. I didn't make that connection at all. When I read that he said that basically self-realization is impossible inside of the model of logotherapy. By itself, direct self-realization is impossible. He says that the self-realization can be only as a product of achieving self-transcendency. How you call that word in English?
Yeah, yeah.
So basically,
Transcendence, yeah.
you finding a meaning outside of yourself when you can find the meaning of yourself at the end. And I thought that completely turned upside down like a Buddhist philosophy, because you find a meaning like inside of yourself, like so many like new age philosophy and stuff, like you always finding like what will fulfill you first, if you fulfill yourself. And he's like, no, you will get that by being out there. You're not finding your meaning in yourself, you're finding out there, either in the beauty or community, doing good things, or just that the way you are dealing with suffering, or all the other life challenges. For me, it was like, whoa, like you really like shake it for people probably.
Yes.
So especially for like, and Freud, like, I love that example. He has this study case of this one guy who was being analyzed, because that's how you used to call that psychoanalytic therapy, right? So he was being analyzed. The reason why he went to the therapy in the first place is because he was working for some like government, and he didn't like the foreign politics or something, and he was very much dissatisfied with his work. So when he went to the psychoanalyst, he was told to analyze his conflicts with authorities, so he probably had to work on his relationship with his father. I almost laughed because that reminded me so many like very unsuccessful therapies in session in my own life, like, let's just think about your childhood for like the next 12 years, whatever.
Yeah.
So anyway, this guy then, I don't know if he moved or whatever, he ended up I guess in front of Frankl or someone else in logotherapy, I think Frankl himself. And he says, I need to be analyzed. And Frankl asks him, why do you think you need to be analyzed? So he tells all the story, and Frankl looks at him and says, well, you don't have to be analyzed. You just need to find a better job that you will like to do. And I was like, this is brilliant, because so many times, like, I think this is why there is a big difference between a conflict you can avoid and resolve, or or the suffering and the problem you can really avoid or not avoid and try to figure out your way around it, is because if there's a difference, if you are anxious in a job because you don't like the job and it doesn't fit like who you really are, then you need to find a different job. Do not spend thousands of dollars and lots of time trying to figure out how can you like this job, like what kind of conflict it is, from your past,
Yes.
or life, or communication problems.
And I think that is very significant, because I see a lot of people, especially in couples counseling, that just hearing from different people that I know that are couples counselors, where it goes back to there's suffering that you can avoid, and then there's
Yes.
suffering that you can't avoid. And
Don't be
if
married to narcissists. We're just gonna figure out how you can make meaning out of it.
right, or maybe your issue, and it's kind of this unintentional gaslighting, where it's like, well, let's figure out, is this issue, did you marry your father or somebody that was like your mother, and let's go to kind of untangle this, and maybe the way that you're viewing their behavior isn't accurate, maybe it's just triggering you because it reminds you of your mother. And it's like, wow, you got really overcomplicating things. Like, this your spouse is a jerk, like,
yes,
selfish jerk. So let's just start there. And
you married a monster. How
you
about
married
you
him on
about divorce?
so they're not going to get fixed. So now
No.
what? And how much suffering are you willing? Where's your line in the sand? How long are you willing to stay here
Mhm.
before you do something different? And that that time frame is different for every single person,
Mhm.
and I get it, where it's sort of like, um, but yeah,
Yeah,
I
it's a
think
big
that's a really
difference.
good question to be asking.
Yeah, like, is there a problem out there that I need to, fix, or is there, or if I cannot fix it, then like what's happening right now, for example, for many of us, we just need to figure out how we can stay sane and positive in the face of, what's happening out right now in the world. So,
Right.
we are like, if I was an epidemiologist, or if I was in politics, then I would be solving some problems. But just because I'm just a little person over here, I need to just figure out the way how can I, survive it, right? So there
Mhm.
are difference. You have to figure out where you are, who you are, and what are really the questions you need to ask of yourself. What is the challenge? And I think that's important to always, find the difference between that. I also love that he says that the role of the therapist, and I think we talk about it on our off talks often, how some of the cognitive behavioral therapists often try to just reframe things for you
Mhm.
and tell you how to see things. And Frankl says that the psychotherapists or logotherapists, like, none of them should ever tell you how to see things. They can ask you questions that will open up the door,
Right.
but their role is more of like the eye doctor, like to give you tools to see something out there, but it is you that can see it, and it is you that can make the meaning, it is you that can choose to be responsible for that. They cannot tell you what and how to see and understand and what to do. It's just immoral, basically.
Yeah, well, and that was more of like the crux of psychotherapy, like Freudian
Mm-hmm.
therapy. It was the the practitioner telling the patient, this is what this means. You have an issue, an unresolved issue with your mother, right? Or your
I swear,
father
if I
is.
heard one more thing about daddy issues and mommy issues in a therapist, I think I would just like
Yeah. Well, and
explode.
this is why it's significant to
Mm-hmm.
figure out, okay, well, what kind of therapy does this person practice, and what is their understanding of this kind of therapy?
Mm-hmm.
Because that is the beauty of existentialism. It's the role of the therapist, according to this therapy, is to help, to allow, give, kind of hold space for a person to be able to define their own meaning. That therapist might ask questions, they might kind of throw out some of their own suggestions, but at the end of
Mm-hmm.
the day, it's up to the client to decide what this event means to them, which is so powerful. I was gonna add something to this, but I don't remember what.
Someone that says, if you have to figure it out on yourself, you will end up in therapy for years.
Yes.
Sandra
Oh,
said that, responding to me, but I don't know exactly about what. Can you tell us more about what you're saying?
divorce. I think, no, it was Changing My Life had made the comment um, before, and now I can't find it, but about continually searching, reading self-help books,
Uh-huh.
trying to figure out ways to improve her communication in order to make the marriage work. And I think so many of us has fallen into that, because the issue is being misinterpreted as,
Yeah.
there's this assumption, especially with a lot of couples counseling,
Mm-hmm.
where if you have a therapist who doesn't understand manipulation,
Mm-hmm.
and they're going into it assuming that both people are coming into it with not only being
Mm-hmm.
sincere with their point of view, but a somewhat healthy point of view, instead of, maybe there's a possibility that one or both people, there's some pathology going on.
I
And
was,
mhm,
I mean, it's hard to. I was wondering why he never said anything, the Frankl in his book, he never tried to say anything about, the bad people in his book, like, why would they do that? Like, he talked just a little bit briefly about the couples, which were the prisoners that just, the way of surviving was to go on the side of the oppressors, basically, right? So they were cooperating and helping them in keeping control in the camp and stuff. So he just talked a little bit about this, why they would do that. But for them, that was survival. But he never, I was wondering what would be his interpretation
Mm-hmm.
of, actually the Nazi, or, the people that he knows just are not good people, that they are capable of doing all the bad things and they are okay with that. Like he never mentioned anything, like he didn't tackle that at all.
Well, I think that was outside of the scope of this book. I know he's written a handful of other books,
Oh,
and
maybe. Okay.
I'd be curious to know if that is covered. Um, I think at the end of the day, it's what happens when you have, um, you have a pathological dictator, and
Mm-hmm.
combined with, Germany was really suffering after World War I,
Yeah.
and it really feeding into their Germans' own need of to feel significant. And then there are a lot of factors at play. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely an oversimplification to just say, oh, well, Hitler was evil, or all
Mm-hmm.
the Nazis were evil. We were talking about this a little bit last night in the live stream about uh,
Why people
uh,
always talk about Hitler at some point? I'm
yeah,
just
I
saying.
think I might have brought it, but the importance of of not just assigning a really vague label, like, oh, this is, Hitler was evil and that's why it happened, or Nazis were evil, or slave owners were evil and that's why it happened.
Yeah.
It's more of that we need to understand that we're all capable of good and evil. So, and to get comfortable, Jung would refer to that more as kind of the dark side, right?
Yeah.
Um, making integrating that side of ourselves, so we need to be aware that it's there so it doesn't happen, and so
He
we can
talks
see it when it starts to come through.
he talks, I think, a little bit at the end of the book about people who are criminals in the prison, and how in a society, people, it's like we have this system of so many excuses that, even people who end up in jail, they can just say, oh, I killed this person because of this, I'm mentally ill, or I was hurt in a childhood, like whatever. They have so many excuses to pick from, and that just doesn't offer people, like we live in that system. We don't have many opportunities for us to actually take responsibility for what we have done. And then he goes further. He talks about a person who actually goes to the prison and talks with prisoners and gives them, like, let them see that what they have done, it's not just they have done it because of all the excuses, but they are responsible for doing that. And the moment they take responsibility, they also have a chance of actually changing. And I think that's why he claims in the logotherapy, some, like in his theories, that every person is capable of changing as long as they're capable of taking that responsibility for themselves and their life. um, and I think that's a great point to make, because we know that the people like narcissists are not capable of taking responsibility, and that's why they would not be capable of making a change,
Right. I mean, that's the
right?
first step, is
Yeah.
accountability. And he does, there's a scene in the book where he talks about, after they were free, there was a prisoner had been freed, who starts kind of walking through a field or
Yeah.
something. And I don't know
They
if
were
I
burying
forget.
the bodies.
Yeah, so, well, something had
Yeah.
happened. He wanted to get oats or something, and um, somebody had made the comment like, "Well, what are you doing? That's not yours. Like, you shouldn't take that, or
100%.
whatever." And the guy's mind has said, "Well, are you kidding me? Like, my wife died, my friends died. Like, I've lost so much that." And it was this entitlement mentality of, I should be able to go and do whatever I want now. I should be able to go and steal some of this farmer's food, or whatever. And Frankl makes the really great point of, we are always like, um doing uh doing something wrong because we think we're right, or because it's
Hmm.
owed to us. It never works. Like, we still have to be accountable for our behavior, and that's how this cycle breaks.
he talks about how freedom that is based in desires is not really a freedom, that that we, like he says, that we should have a statue of liberty on one cause, and on the other cause we should have a statue of responsibility, and those two can balance each other. And this is like, for him, being responsible is something that only human beings are capable of, and he puts it actually at the core of our humanity. And I think he makes a great point, because animals are not responsible. Dogs are not responsible for what they have done. Like they not capable. We humans are the only ones that are are capable of being responsible for what we say, what we think, what we do, what we want, and how we go about it. And like even asking those questions and defining what it means to be responsible. So
Yeah, I also just wanted to back up a little bit and just
you
about
have your
the
notes, I have mine.
yeah, well, no, about the comment of kind of mental illness as an excuse for a crime. And
Yeah.
just kind of FYI, when to people listening, like, a person can say, "Oh, I did this," and a lot of criminals, you'll have that, they'll try
Hmm.
that defense, but the court has to find them mentally incompetent
Hmm.
and not fit to stand trial, or not fit at the time. And when a person is completely psychotic, when they're not in this reality at all, they're not responsible for their behavior, because when they're medicated, they're totally a different person. So that's different. But yes, if we are, uh, cognitively aware, we're able to make decisions, we're able to do these things with our life, we're able, the actions we take, we do need to be accountable for them. And
Hmm.
it's always worth, if our actions aren't turning out for us, to examine kind of what's going on there. And um, yeah,
Yeah, it was a good book.
yeah, it was. And real quick, guys, next book for next month, for May 2020, is called Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It by Kamal Ravikant. And I will post the link in the chat, but you can find book club stuff, thriveafterabuse.com, under the read tab, and it says book club 2020. So check that out. Also, these
There
books,
is more.
yes, keep in mind that um, you can, if you don't have a library card, it's worth signing up for one. Hoopla is a wonderful app that you can get a lot of free audiobooks. Sometimes you have to order them if they don't have them. And also, Audible sponsors these book clubs. So if you're interested, you get a free book when you sign up. If you're a new subscriber, if you go to, I believe it's
Hmm.
audibletrial.com/thrive after abuse, or just use the code Thrive After Abuse, you're eligible for a free audiobook.
Only first one.
Yes. Yes.
And then you will turn into an audible junkie like I
Yes.
am.
Yes. It happens. I use both Audible and Hoopla. And then somebody was telling me the other day, like, there's another, Scribd and Google Play also have audiobooks where it's a flat fee per month. And
I heard about Portal that like gives you a 15 minutes, like just the core of the book, kind of. Like it's like
mm,
if you cannot read the whole book, I forgot the name of it, but I wanted to try it one time. So
yeah, there's a couple out there. Well, I think that's it for tonight. Is there anything that you would want to say?
about the search for meaning.
Just in general before we sign off?
No, it's all great. Thank you so much. It was
Okay.
fun and
Yes. Thank
pleasure.
you for being here and for your insights. We all appreciate them.
Thank you. It
And
was a great book. I really appreciate it. I thank you for changing the book in the last minute.
I know, I'm so
Four
sorry.
days to read it.
I know, I'm so sorry. Um, yeah, yeah. The other book it's fantastic.
It's great.
I know, I do. I think
No, it's
it's still on
great.
the list, but it's so heavy. And I'm like, I do not have time. I need to read it a couple
The
times.
other book is for clinicians.
I would agree with that.
It's she said that it's really written for clinicians, but some people can benefit from it. And I'm like, was Dana crazy? It's like,
Dana was over ambitious when,
but it's a good book. We should do it within a couple months. I'm halfway done. It's a great book. I
yeah,
really recommend it. So
yeah, I would agree. It is a
yeah,
good book.
it's good.
Jack asked if I found out if there's still promos on my narcissist playbook. I forgot to look, but I will see what I can do. I think I have to. I wish there was just one link that you could give and then it's first come, first serve, but you have to, it's one promo code per one link. So I'll see, and I think they're only valid here in the US. So I'll have to see if they're still valid, and if so, how we can get them to people. But thank you guys again so much for being here. We will hopefully, well, at a minimum, we'll see you Tuesday for Angie and I's live stream, Wednesday for our support live stream, and then the
I'll be
last
back next
Thursday.
month.
Yeah, the last Thursday of every month, book club, 6:30 p.m. So
Love yourself like your life depends on it.
yes, yes,
Okay, maybe we should practice it.
yes. So, okay, guys. Yes, lots of love to you. You are not alone. You are not crazy, and
I am a
you.
little crazy.
This is true. And you can move forward and heal from this.
Say that.
So, take you. Oh, I will add that to Devora mentions Dana. Can you do the year of magical thinking? I can look into that, and I'm always taking requests for books, at least for 2021.
It's about
So
brain trauma. That could be
yeah,
interesting.
I think that sounds fascinating. Yeah, I agree. I'm highlighting it as we speak, putting it in the file of books to look into.
We should read something really light right now. It's heavy outside. That's what I'm saying.
It is heavy outside. I
Yeah.
know. I was thinking, and I think I took it off the list, but one of the books I was thinking about was oh, it's by Don Miguel Ruiz. It's the Toltec Wisdom, Four Agreements.
Oh
It's a
God, no, I
short.
read that.
You.
I read it. No.
Oh, I like that book.
It's a little too much for me.
Okay, it's been
I would
years
read
since I've read it.
I would read like Atomic Habits by Jason Clare because it helps people outcrowd their bad habits with the good habits. It's great. Also, we should eat something about how to eat better because we are gonna end this pandemic a little bit bigger than we started.
Yes.
Because everyone's baking bread.
Oh my gosh. I know. I hear. No, that's actually some great advice.
Okay.
Atomic
We should
Habits
figure out something good soon.
is
Are we still
fantastic.
live? Are we still live?
We are still live.
About
Yeah,
everything now.
this is what happens. Okay.
He's my friend. I'm sorry.
Atomic. What was the other? Oh, something about uh emotional eating. Would that be
Oh,
accurate?
that was We Are What We Eat by Dr. Ramani Durvasula or something like this. She's great. She wrote a book about narcissism too. Should I go?
I do enjoy her. Yeah.
It's so fun.
We'll check it out. We'll do some research and
Yeah,
see
she's
what we
really
can.
fun.
Okay, good deal. Good night, you guys.
Good day,
Thank you
everyone.
so much.
Stay
for being
healthy. Wash your hands.
Yes, wash your hands. Take care. Bye.